There you go. Take it away.
So I was going to ask everybody tonight, are you nervous? But then I realized it's me that should be nervous. So, I'll try breaking a leg without losing your attention. Sometime recently, the evening host slide of the evening host Trevor Noah wrote a book that's been pretty well celebrated called Born a Crime.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about his life growing up in South Africa under the apartheid system. And it was at a time when liaisons between the races were considered illegal. And we kind of look on South Africa as though they were backward. And yet, next slide, we also overlooked the fact that anti-miscegenation laws were on the books in America until 1968,
Mm-hmm.
when the Loving versus Virginia decision finally rendered by the Supreme Court unanimously agreed to abolish anti-miscegenation laws. So, and we're all excited about, well, no, I shouldn't say we all are, but there's much being made of Kamala Harris's mixed parentage, mixed Asian and Black parentage. And I can tell you, I got her beat because my mother and my father met in the West Indies. My father was an Uzbek husbandman, a part of a family of husbandmen who had been brought to the West Indies to take care of animals on a plantation that raised cane, as it were. Maybe that's my problem. And also cotton. And this was this, and cotton, as we know, both in America and many other places, was king. So much so that when the slaves who were brought to the US shores came, they were mostly sought to do the free work in the brutal cotton fields. And we can see that embraced by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, which declared that anyone who was not free, considered a free person, was counted as three-fifths of a person, hence the whole notion that the South gained ascendancy since there were many more slaves in the South than the North. So 1967 was when the Loving decision came down, but not exactly when I was born, which means you can take it to mean whatever you want, but it means that I was born a crime too. And I was born a member of three, a party of three, split zygote twin boys and myself. Next slide. Mother, I want to start this in the same way that I tend to start all of my poetry readings, and that is with a poem that is a call and response. Now, I know that we're not set up for response, but I want you to hold the response in your mind. My first thing, though, is to ask yourselves, how many mitochondrial mothers do we have? We have one. It's not a trick question. And her oldest evidences are found in Africa. We have one mitochondrial mother. I have become a Baha'i, and we believe in the agreement between science and spirit. And I can say this, that means we're all African. So the chorus that I want you to hold in your mind as I share this poem with you, African, is we all began as African. We all began as African. Africa, some lynch or revile. African, some sigh over style. We all began as African. Hard to wrap your mind around? How many ape that R&B sound? Hairstyles, dances, ghetto walk, colors, fashion, special talk. We all began as African. Even if you might deny it, something you have testifies it. It will emerge, nudge round your edges, assert itself, primordial pledges. We all began as African. No matter who we marry, how dark or light our skin, whether our nose is pointy or broad, our lips thick or thin, we all began as African. From Madrid to Mombasa, que viva la raza, Lucerne to Lhasa, no matter what the motherland, we all began as African. Try to set yourself apart, you'll find you rose from start. We all began as African. Africa, a woman not your mother, first offered her breast to you and me, baldly claims us, frankly names us. We all began as African. From Kampala to Karachi, Iceland to Iran, the dark and the wan, she has never gone. We all began as African. Insidious muse, ambience flu, gives us black blues, jittery shoes, try as we can, denounce any plan. We all began as African. We all began as African. Next slide. Mother was over 40 and had borne one son decades before. A quack convinced her we were tumors, punched, needled, x-rayed. She was so septic and swollen that a neighbor dropped her in front of a county hospital. They'll know what's wrong with you. She hardly spoke English and woke to 5 white men in white coats. She remembers they floated above her semi-conscious, making gestures of scissors cutting and babies being rocked. How shocked she must have been. Beyond these, she saw a glittering Lake Michigan and tried to rise. Their cries said, no! Their faces said, die! All die! If so, why not walk into the water? No talk, no barter, all an end. Instead, they called my decade younger father. No buts about the cuts. Babies, he roared as he emerged from his supervisor's stolen car, sirens soaring all around, his feet hardly touched ground. And he learned, yes, there would be 3. Oh, the wonder. Oh, the glee. Babies! Back then, neonatal care was hardly a concept. We 3 all should have died. Split zygote boys and me, his lonely jewel. Before the hospital weeks elapsed, one did leave, calling as he left. Later, I find he has called my boy away too, and today I must stand accept his lonely jewel. Next. Our manic mama. For those who know her. She was short, stout, and stultifying. There was no defying my mother. My mother was a picture of ambivalence. When 41, she learned that she was not only still fertile, but becoming the mother of triplets. Two of us lived past the incubators our premature births required. Maybe that would have unhinged the strongest of spirits. When we were old enough to notice, our arrival had certainly been among the things that marked our manic mama. She had not yet mastered English, but she had a terminal degree in perception. Once in the U.S., she found that as a dark-skinned woman, many assumptions and exclusions would be a regular part of her existence. And because she'd married against the backdrop of a country where anti-miscegenation laws were still in place around the country, she knew that her love was illegal in more places than not, and that her children represented a kind of defiance that she passed on to us. We were 4 when she drove our father away. She knew by then that the sting of life would be lessened if the source of her lighter-skinned children was nowhere in sight. We went from a tolerable family life to squatting on a property that was overgrown with blackberry vines and ivy. Until the government developed other plans in the area, we lived there undetected. When we passed an age where we could basically eat off the property, or all the fruits she assiduously canned for others were gone from trees and jars, she stuffed food stored in parts of her clothing that concealed their journey home to us. School lunches, onions on bread. She would have been an untouchable nearly everywhere, since her jumbled ethnicities floated through feather, dot, and West Indian roots. Talking to her was like listening to a veritable United Nations of wives' tales whirling about. I'll never forget what she thought about swimming during one cycle or the uncleanliness of tampons. She wasn't superstitious, just monstrously misinformed. When we were sick, garlic, chili paste, honey, and goose grease seemed to be the remedy for nearly everything. Those were the mentionable substances anyway. Then there were social interactions. Until we were well past childhood, anything approaching sleepover or time away was inconceivable. She told us our hosts might kidnap us. We were meant to go through life as twins and accompany each other to anything we did. It was a protection and our birthright, no matter that we would have traded most anything, especially back then, to forfeit that right. And no, even if you had an entree, don't try to suggest that she was anything but what she wanted to be in the world. Told that her slip was hanging, she'd shoot back, "Well, it's clean, isn't it?" To feed our tween-age appetites, she continued to sneak home food from wealthy homes whose kosher kitchens she maintained. For many years, she had no stove or means to purchase and prepare our own food at home. I learned to cook from books once I reached college. Waste was a sin the depression taught her outweighed virtually every other transgression. One day, she mistakenly put hair pomade from a tube on our toothbrushes. She overrode our anguished protests against brushing our teeth with it. Never wanting to waste, Mama told us that whatever was on our brush, we had to use it. She supervised us finishing the job, too. I'm sure by the time I reached adolescence and colleges began sending me solicitous scholarship offers, she knew I was slipping away from whatever kind of life she could ever envision for me. While it was her Cinderella dream for me to somehow fit life's golden slipper, the thought of my departure and possible success pained her so much that she began a campaign of psychological guilt tripping that surrounds my assessment of those years. You'll be just like Dorothy Dandridge in Imitation of Life and deny me. You'll go away and make up your entire past. You'll put on airs. Frankly, I knew that air would stink. My past stank. But it was mine, and so was she. She was the mother who made sure I saw virginity as a virtue, respect as a requirement, mobility as a norm, faith as a watchword. I owe her my resilience, my maladies, and my victories. She left too soon for there ever to be anything like understanding between us. But denying her wasn't even an option. She is alive in my every corpuscle and muscle. Yes, just as she said, I've got mine. Brown baby, when you grow up, I want you to drink from the plenty cup. I want you to stand up straight and proud. I want you to speak out clear and loud. Brown baby, as years go by, I want you to go with your head held high. I want you to walk down the freedom road. I want you to live by the justice code. Brown baby, so lie away sleeping, lie away deep in my arms while your daddy and mommy lay keeping you safe from all harm. Oh, you little brown baby, it makes me glad you will have things I've never had. When out of men's hearts all the hate is furled, you'll be a part of a better world. Brown baby. Next slide. Before the fall, and I should tell you about this picture. We come from Jewish roots, but my mother would get money from different people that knew us, and they would pay her, they would give her clothes, and they'd pay her to take us to see Santa and get a photo so they could put it on their mantle and say, oh yes, this is my girls' children. Before the fall, first dawn, she'd send us out when the hard green kernels turned to beckoning blue blackness, and the swelter of sugar followed the sun's rays to earth. We two could barely stand high enough to keep the buckets from tracing our whereabouts as we went. Only a blanket and some small water between us. Our job was to return from the brambles with only berries. No scars, no accidents, no admitted fears. The blanket would be our companion and protector when the air changed from close to cool and all the signs beside became night, weighted and unreadable. We sat shuddering and happy in our twin entwining, eating the berries until our lids outweighed responsibility, fear, satiety. Come morning, only one bucket full. We painted each other new colors, Mendy motif mapping out brown until we too became new, crunching among the scents, claiming other homes, refilling the buckets with refreshed paint. Once home, we extended her piece by the bucketfuls, brandished our equally blue then boy chests, flat canvases smeared with the indigo of our excessive success. No scars, no accidents, no admitted fears. Mobility, hunger, and two predictions seem to be a part of the lens I look through life. We had to move a lot of times, and I didn't realize for a long time that the reason was because my mother would owe rent to varying landlords, and we'd slip out in the middle of the night with a red flyer wagon and our clothes in it and go to the next place that would rent to us. But when we were in Seattle, we were in this place where we squatted. And one of the few ways that we earned some money was this way. And this is called en route. Early out, the only light is in my eyes. We made our way to tribal buses that followed a well-worn route from Seattle to Walla Walla. So small we could simply take our twin tininess and rush back into sleep, lulled by the roar and hurtle of miles behind, miles ahead. Waken to the magic of conch pink sunrise. Barely able to stand all day, we were useful at gathering windfalls into piles stronger hands and bands took to weigh. During the day, those whose beloveds were in prison left on another bus for visits, returning red-eyed, red-lipped, and so moccasin silent. End of day was dark once more. The bus smelled of effort, green, unclean. Like a turning of seasons, we went once again, hungry hands, bodies, pockets, eyes, noses, sighs. My mother's two predictions. One was that if our life became untenable, if it became intolerable, insufferable, that we could pray, be greeted by light, and the elders' hands would lift us up to a more beautiful, safe place where we could always be sheltered. The other prediction, I'll save for later. Hungry. So hungry that one holiday we ate a squirrel, gift of a neighbor, pained by our need. So hungry that the only Hebrew national that mattered was edible. My mother snuck snacks and frozen food out of others' houses After school, we waited wide-eyed, sometimes hours, our mouths nearly fully open. No way to cook, just disgorge and hastily engorge, raw, frozen, warmed by her body heat. However, it survived. Waste worse than a curse word in our home. Our late to motherhood parent survived and brought alive to us the Great Depression. What was so great? She cooked kosher for wealthy faithful, unable to be as capable at deprivation, prevarication, and fabrication. Oh, she could bring it all together and so thoroughly strip our wants and imperfections to the bile. All the while, no lapses permitted. So much so that when she misapplied hair pomade from a toothpaste look-alike tube, we had to brush our teeth with it, holding back the gag lest another punishable offense tag our bodies with pain. And yet somehow, our view of others with more did not include envy or even want. If we befriended our way to anticipated or spontaneous bounty, so much the better. When the river of plenty did not flow or dried before us, we mourned and stayed on alert, prayed a trickle or trickle might resume. My only wish then is yet the same, that the imprint of hunger, of thrift, might not remain so long standing and dear a companion. Next slide. Oh, could we go back? I'm sorry. Thank you. The way home. 2634 East Helen Street. It's probably the first English sentence we learned to speak. My mother knew we were squatting on the property containing this address. Yes, I mean squatting. There was no house, no lights, no water. Having to get to work early, she left us alone every day, first in a playpen and then on this overgrown property. We toileted where we wanted and relished the many rainy days for all the water we could drink, bathe in, or wash our clothes. But don't worry about that part. The biggie was that my twin brother and I had become of school age. And unlike the other students we would be encountering, we would arrive unescorted and had to be taught how to seek home. Weeks before kindergarten, Mother began drilling us in the frightful art of navigating the outer world with little to no adult supervision. As we approached September, she walked us to and from Harrison Elementary 3 times, carrying a watch with a sweep hand to determine just how long this trip should reasonably take. We were already trained to play or wander within the sound of a whistle that once sounded marked a 3-minute grace period. If we didn't return by then, we bore many a mark to assure more perfect, timely future compliance. The first day of school was fast approaching when she loosed us like eager dogs to the hunt. We had nothing more to guide us than the muscle memory of those 3 prior mama-guided and timed practice rounds. Down the overgrown, ragged, steep, bramble-covered drive we surged. First Vern, then me, venturing ahead to guide us to where we'd learn to go. What did we look for? Or did smell guide us? Or was it some primal inward compass that connected us to something that would remake our future? Whatever it was, we worried only that we would face a whipping once home if we were tardy. We completed that first trip chins forward, turning back when we saw the school in sight to better assure that we'd escape punishment. Mama let weeks pass before she again checked whether our memories, instincts, and feet still guided truth. The week after, school began. At the end of 5th grade, The government decided to use the Seattle land we'd enjoyed for years unmolested to build a highway overpass, and our carefully cosseted nest would be uncovered. Mama was incensed about having to move. She alone knew when that fateful day came and our direction would take a sharp turn. Mama feigned an accident where she worked, and with the settlement money she received, she did the only thing she expected would allow us to survive homelessness. She reconnected with a woman who thought she was our aunt. Mama fooled this fooler, a madam who owned a duplex in the middle of the ghetto, in the middle of the country. Aunt B never charged rent, only gambled with her tenants who lived below her when they gambled with her in the off hours. She won enough to keep the mortgage paid, not to mention keeping up the payments for her annually traded in Thunderbirds in an array of Easter egg colors that still drive past in my dreams. We had not traveled from the west for long, but what a journey. We took a train carrying little more than the clothes on our back and a couple steamer trunks that must have contained little we needed, for they didn't remain with us long. A porter took pity on our hungry eyes and snuck leftovers to us on platters made to look as though we'd ordered. With a wink, he and the food would be gone. It made me expect a magic that we wouldn't find once off the train. I felt the wheels beneath me for months, and that memory helped carry me through the many growing pains and moves that followed our first narrow escape. In retrospect, when my mother taught us to make those first unknown runs together, to hear the whistle of her guidance directing our feet from harm and stupidity, she was sheltering us from a brutal environment, from the indignities to which she herself was daily subjected to or witnessed. And while I still bear the scars of my past, I learned to approach moving with an explorer's anticipation and the expectation of surprise. There have been many, and like that demanding whistle, I hear her calling me to arrive whole, unscathed, and ready. Exile. That name, that escape was the big one. Not those midnight leaps from debt to more in one time. Not honor-bound maneuver, not with our wagon and what fit, but with our feet and what couldn't. We'd been found out. Our squatters' camp no more right than anything than anything else we tried to invoke. Here was spoken our banishment. No money for anything so monumental. The change was affected by lies, crying, and furtive goodbyes. A train roared beneath us, as strong as admonitions, relentless, the commotion of torn attachments and exhaustion. That rumbling alive under my ass in buses, benches, classrooms, the gravestones of our would-be playground, and even the groundless bed, hovering under a troubled head's endless wishful departures. Now so long, and I still cannot stop the perpetual motion of exile. It's pulsing, as steady as rutting steel wheels, from child to what is left to wear away in exile. How did that exile feel? Where was that exile to? Well, as I said, the middle of the country, and I prayed fervently. We lived in places that would get very cold in the winter in Wisconsin. We had no heat, we had no light, we had no running water. In fact, the only thing good about winter was that you could put some ice cream, if you ever got any, on the sill and it would be cold. That was a treat. We began going to public school as was usual. At During the first years in grade school, um, it was a deeply riven city, and uh, my mother had to ask for us to be permitted to go home early after school because we'd get beat up because we didn't look like the other kids, and we didn't know how to do things like jump double dutch and say all of the things that people said, when all the kids said when they were going down the street. And so she asked, could we please be allowed out of school 5 minutes early so that we could rush back home and they couldn't get us. And we were allowed, and we ran like crazy. Well, then we went to junior high school, and again in Milwaukee. And again, it was hard. The kids, Vern was such a handsome, such a handsome boy. And he was very athletic. And because he could be the social initiator, he did quite well despite everything. But he still was supposed to be my protector, and he did the best his his abilities permitted. And at school in junior high, the kids would gather around during recess before we were put into the cafeteria. And this was a school that had undergone a reconfiguration because of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Even though it was well before we were in junior high school, Milwaukee did a dance and shuffle for many years. And when we got there, the kids knew we didn't have much. Vern, they always just, forwarded some food to him. Me, on the playground, they threw pennies and made fun as I picked them up. And that's how I paid for my school lunches in junior high. The next slide. By high school, the hostilities and the investments that people had in the schools being the way they always had became even sharper. And I can remember that one of the earworms in my existence was Janice Ian's Society's Child. Come to my door, baby, faces clean and shining black as the night. My mama went to answer, you know that you looked so fine. I could understand your tears and your shame. She called you boy instead of your name. When she wouldn't let you inside. When she turned and said, oh honey, he's not our kind. I can't see you anymore. She says, I can't see you anymore. Walk me down to school, baby. Everybody's acting deaf and blind until they turn and say, why don't you stick to your own kind? Our teachers all laugh their smirking stares, cutting deep down in our affairs. Preachers of equality, If they believe it, then why won't they just let us be? They say, I can't see you anymore, baby. Can't see you anymore. One of these days I'm gonna stop my listening, gonna raise my head up high. One of these days I'm gonna raise my glistening wings to fly. That day will have to wait for a while. Baby, I'm only society's child. When we're older, things may change. But for now, this is the way they must remain. I can't see you anymore. Oh, I don't want to see you anymore. In my high school, I never dated a single student. My twin brother's dates were mostly furtive. The only date I had was a switch around with a good friend of mine named Jocelyn, who helped us create the evening with the Tom and the Tom. But it was not ever the feeling of being. So, once again, I prayed. I was so hungry. It was so dark. It was so cold. And I fainted. And I saw light, such light. And I thought the elders had taken me to this wonderful, luminous place. Well, they had, but at that time, I didn't know it. But then I built, Vern and I built 2 posses. Next slide. The first posse was, we heard about the Baha'i faith. We saw people who finally lived according to a principle of the unity of all. And there were 3 young men, the Stokeleys. You can see 2 of them here, Skylar and Wirza. You see my brother in the stylish aviators, and Skylar and Wirza are just below him. This posse, Skylar and Wirza's parents, worked like ponies, got them a van, and told them that one of the conditions of having this van was that they were to go from Illinois to Wisconsin to pick us up, to take us to Baha'i events all over, but especially at a Baha'i school in Michigan. And that school, we worked part-time and were able to go to many of the classes when we were free. And that's where we found our first posse. But that was only good in the summers and maybe on some weekends. Next slide. Milwaukee was remaining the most racially segregated area. And you will see now a report in 2019, 1 year ago, that indicates that well past the time that I left Milwaukee, Milwaukee remains the most segregated city in America. Next, a video.
I think it is one of the tragedies of our nation, one of the shameful tragedies, that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is one of the most segregated hours, if not the most segregated hours in Christian America.
In this clip,
I
I'm sorry that
definitely
we
think
can't
the
hear it.
Christian church should be
Martin Luther
integrated,
King
and any church
indicates
that
that at 11 in the morning on Sunday is America's most segregated hour. And still, that contention can be upheld. Oh, you could hear it. Oh, lovely.
Let it play again.
Are we still there? Okay, so may I have the next slide if Martin Luther King, I'm sure it's over. Can people hear? Oh, okay. So my other posse came about in that school. It was a posse I recruited my twin brother to help me with. We gathered our friends who had enough courage to join us. It was at a time before peer counseling. It was at a time before encounter groups. We decided to put together a group called Move Together. We had a short skit, and the school was so incensed that they accused us of fomenting racial hatred in our high school. And they brought the Human Rights Commission of Milwaukee into the school to talk to us. And I told them that the school was going to implode if someone didn't address it, and we were prepared to. And they said, well, you find a teacher that will, well, let's see what you're going to do. So we showed them. I had a 5-minute skit, but the skit absolutely in that 5 minutes unpacked the whole issue. And then we gathered together, and the two of our members that weren't in the skit went up and used the board and spoke to each other. And they talked about the deeply entrenched attitudinal, linguistic, systemic things that were an indication of the racism. The men in white hats, the men in black hats, blackmail, angel food cake, devil's food cake. Then we started asking the kids why our presence, why the presence of students of color at the school was so threatening. And they said, well, you know, our parents say that all of you are so stupid and you're going to ruin the grade point average and the reputation of the school, and we won't get into the colleges we want. We won't have the scholarships and opportunities we want. And in that school classroom period, everybody left that room. They were crying, they were scared, and they were deeply, deeply affected by what they knew in their deepest parts was driving their bigotry. Well, the Human Rights Commission watched us in a classroom. They watched from a hidden spot, and they saw what happened in that classroom. But even more importantly, we were allowed to move together into classes about history, poli-sci, civics, and psychology. And within 3 weeks, all the fights that were going on at the school, all of them stopped. And there were about 4 other schools relatively close that were having the same problems. So our experience of busing was that Move Together got taken to these schools to make presentations. And at the end of that school year, so much had changed within the schools that the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee had a special summer course that each of us earned 1 credit for, and attending that course was every student who was going to be on the student governing bodies of the high school in the following year. Next slide. So then I went away to college on a full scholarship and went through a lot. I saw a different kind of prejudice because everyone knew that I was a very rare admission, and they all made assumptions about my capacities, abilities. I went to Reed in Portland, Oregon, and I went back to Seattle, to that place that was supposed to have been torn down for an overpass. And after we had been pushed off the property, there was such a hue and cry in Seattle that the overpass was never built. It was still covered with blackberries and apricot trees, pines. When I'm standing in front of a pine that was just about above my head when we first got moved. Next slide. I wound up, after being at Reed, in Montana. And I got marooned in Montana. I shaved my head and sat Shiva for myself. And when I finished, I decided I would see if I could get some scholarship money. And I wound up going into broadcasting, working for National Public Radio. Next slide. That work as a producer and cultural reporter landed me at NYU in the summers, working for the National Urban League, doing keynote speaker collapses for synopses for radio stations all over the country. Next slide. Then I lost my mother, but I think she recognized that I didn't ever deny her. And I spent nearly 20 years looking for Richard Henry Petch, my father. He was very ill at that point, but he told me that when my mother told him to leave, he told her, I would eat dog to be with my children. And so all the faith I had that he somehow cared about us was really brought to a wonderful end. Then, of course, there was the other prediction I told you I'd tell you, that my mother made, that if I ever met a man who told me that I reminded him of his grandmother, that was the man I was going to marry. Now, I love to bake, I love to cook. I had a lot of friends. My friends would come in and say, "Oh, this house smells just like my grandmother's." That is not what my mother predicted. One time, a man who had shown great interest in me uh, and I were walking down the street, and he said something snarky, and I slapped him as hard in the solar plexus as I could. And when he got his breath back, he said, "You remind me of my grandmother." Next slide. And that's the man I married. Avowal. I'd read the phrase many times, heard it fewer. White knuckle ride, course, climb, read, experience, denouement. Still, I never knew what it could mean. Brown as a bean and only darkening when aroused. I married you despite wishing so. Your freckles never grew together. Despite wishing, then fearing no, we did. I watched, you drove, strove to keep your fear in check. Heading to the not at all altar, deep in an enchanted valley, speaking our vows before the quiet circle of love's armor. Your eyes ablaze, big as Ferris wheels, wondering how a lifetime together would feel. Once a revolution, tens a revolution, and on. No devolution. Au contraire, it's the compounded interest, enriching our family trust. There's a new world coming, and it's just around the bend. There's a new world coming. This one's coming to an end. There's a new voice calling. You can hear it if you try, and it's growing stronger with each day that passes by. There's a brand new morning, rising sweet and clear and free. There's a new day dawning that belongs to you and me. Yes, a new world's coming, the one we've had visions of. Coming in peace, coming in joy, coming in love.
Well, thank you very much, Vernyce. Very moving account of life